Hello, dear listener, and welcome to another episode of Architecture Topics. I'm your host, Liam Karen, and today we're going to travel together to the very north of the west coast of the United States. We are heading back to Seattle for the second time this season to talk about the most recognizable structure in its skyline, the Space Needle. But before we dive in, if you are new to the show, be sure to follow Architecture Topics on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen. If you are not new, well, first of all, glad to have you back. And second, consider leaving a review. And if you have done that already, then I just have one more favor to ask. Share the show. Share it on your WhatsApp groups, share on your social media, share it with a colleague, share it with a friend. Word of mouth is by far the best way to keep this show going. Amazing. Thank you for your support. It means more than you think. Now let's move on with today's story. To understand the Space Needle, we have to go back to Seattle in the late 1950s. At the time, it was a growing city, but not yet a world city. There was no Microsoft, no Starbucks, no Amazon. Back then, Seattle was known for timber, shipbuilding, and Boeing airplanes. Solid, but hardly glamorous. And civic leaders wanted more. They wanted to put Seattle on the map. So in 1957, they hatched an idea: host a World's Fair. These exhibitions had a long tradition of showcasing progress and possibility. Chicago, Paris, London, Barcelona, they had all done it before. So why not Seattle? They pitched the Bureau of International Expositions on a bold theme: Century 21. The fair would show the world what the 21st century might look like, full of rockets, computers, atomic power, and confidence in technology. This was the space age, after all. Sputnik had just launched, and Americans were dreaming of the moon. But in order for their pitch to have an impact, Seattle knew their proposal needed a monumental centerpiece, like Paris had the Eiffel Tower, London the Crystal Palace, or Brussels the Atomium. In this case, the idea for that centerpiece came from an unlikely source: a hotel executive named Edward Carlson. Carlson wasn't an architect or an engineer, but as president of Western International Hotels, he had a knack for showmanship. On a trip to Stuttgart, Germany, he'd been struck by the city's new television tower, a tall concrete column with an observation deck and restaurant on top. The Germans had managed to turn something functional into a symbol. That image stayed with him. And one afternoon, sitting in a Seattle hotel lounge, he grabbed a cocktail napkin and sketched his idea. A soaring tower, slender at the base, flaring at the top, with a restaurant that seemed to float in the sky. It was simple. It was futuristic. And to him, it felt like the most Century 21 thing possible. He began showing his little sketch to city leaders and fair organizers. At first, there wasn't much enthusiasm. Some thought it was too fanciful, too costly, and too strange. But Carlson was persistent. He believed that Seattle deserved more than just another exhibition hall or fountain. And eventually, his enthusiasm won them over. The Fairs Board agreed. If they could figure out how to build it, the tower would become the signature of the 1962 World's Fair. A few months later, in November 1960, Seattle was officially granted the fair. The tower, which by the way was not yet named, was already on the drawing board, ready to become its star attraction. Once the idea was greenlit, the fair's organizers had to turn Carlson's napkin sketch into something that could actually stand, and stand up to scrutiny. They brought in architect John Graham, known for his innovative department stores, and more notably, for pioneering the revolving restaurant concept at the top of the La Ronde Tower in Honolulu. That detail, a dining room that slowly spun above the city, was a perfect fit for Carlson's futuristic vision. But Graham wasn't alone. He collaborated with University of Washington professor Victor Steinbrück, who added his own modernist sensibility, and the artist Edward Anderson, whose early sketches helped refine the tower's distinctive silhouette. Together, they shaped the familiar profile we know today, a tripod base of 3 tapering legs rising to meet a flying saucer-like disc above. It was a strange hybrid of engineering and imagination. Part broadcast tower, part sculpture, part amusement ride. The press had a field day mocking it at first. They called it everything from a flying saucer on a stick to the coffee can in the sky. But the design team didn't flinch. To them, it was bold. It was modern. And it was perfectly in tune with the Century 21 theme. And once the final plans were unveiled, even the skeptics began to admit it was unlike anything else in the country. Design in hand, the next challenge was building it, and building it fast. The clock was ticking. The fair was scheduled to open in April 1962, and at this point, they had just over a year to finish. It is important to mention that, unlike the Eiffel Tower and many other structures designed within the context of world fairs, the Space Needle was never meant to be a temporary structure. Seattle saw the tower as part of a bigger vision, something that went beyond the expo and that could become an icon of the skyline and boost the tourist economy. The tower was also privately promoted, and the investors planned to recoup their money over decades. In fact, the entire project was privately financed, not by the city, not by the fair, but by a group of 5 Seattle businessmen who formed what they called the Pentagram Corporation. The group included Edward Carlson, the hotel executive who dreamed it up, Howard Wright, the contractor who would actually build it, architect John Graham, and 2 civic boosters, Bagley Wright and Ned Skinner. Together, they raised about $4.5 million, roughly $48 million in 2025's money, to bring the vision to life. Now, back to the construction challenge. The design was ready, but the city hadn't yet settled on a site. Eventually, the team settled on a small triangular parcel at the edge of the fairgrounds, which was purchased by the Pentagram Corporation, also with private money, in the early months of 1961. Finally, with barely a year before opening day, construction could start, and it did so in April of that same year. The engineering was as audacious as the design. The base would be just 37 meters across, 120 feet, but the top would flare out to 42 meters in diameter, or 138 feet. And yet it had to stand firm against winds of up to 200 miles per hour. That's over 300 kilometers per hour, and earthquakes as strong as any the Pacific Northwest could throw at it. Crews worked through rain and snow, pouring 5,600 tons of concrete into the foundation that would anchor a tower that seemed as if it was built upside down. It was narrow at the bottom, with all the weight and width perched high above. Piece by piece, the steel legs rose into the air, joined at the top by the saucer-shaped observation deck and restaurant. As the structure climbed, the mood in Seattle began to shift. What many had scoffed at as a gimmick was starting to look like something remarkable. Locals gathered to watch it grow week by week, floor by floor. It was around this time when workers nicknamed it the Needle, long before the public did. It wasn't until late 1961 that the name Space Needle was officially adopted, inspired by its futuristic space-age look, and the nickname the workers had given it, which had also spread into the public. Unlike other monumental projects that endured years of ridicule before being accepted, Seattleites warmed to the Space Needle surprisingly quickly, embracing its strange silhouette as a bold symbol of their city's future. Even before it was finished, the city's skepticism began to turn into a quiet pride. And against all odds, they finished it on time. Just in time. The final piece of steel was hoisted into place in December 1961. And on April 21st, 1962, the Century 21 Exposition opened its gates. Standing proudly at the edge of the fairgrounds was Seattle's new crown jewel, the Space Needle. At 184 meters tall, or 605 feet, it was the tallest building west of the Mississippi, and its futuristic silhouette made it the instant icon of the fair. From day one, visitors lined up to ride the glass elevators to the top at a rate of some 20,000 people a day. Some visitors froze as soon as the elevator doors opened at the top, clutching the railings and refusing to step onto the glass-enclosed observation deck, while others leaned right into the thrill, pressing their noses to the windows and marveling at the sweeping views of Mount Rainier, Puget Sound, and the glittering city below. And in the revolving restaurant, diners enjoyed the novelty of a full 360-degree turn every hour while sipping cocktails high above the ground. The vision Carlson casually sketched on a napkin was a huge success. By the time the fair closed, 6 months later, more than 2.3 million people had visited the Space Needle. What had begun as a whimsical sketch was now inseparable from the city's identity. And it never gave that status back. In the decades that followed, the Space Needle became more than just an observation tower. It became the centerpiece of countless postcards, the backdrop to movies and TV shows, and the place Seattleites go to mark anniversaries and proposals, or just show off their city to visitors. It lights up in different colors to mark holidays and local sports victories, and every New Year's Eve, fireworks shoot from its tip, watched by thousands in the streets below. It remains Seattle's beacon, not just a memory of the space age, but a living part of the city's daily life. Over the years, it's been modernized, of course, most recently in 2018, when glass floors and floor-to-ceiling windows were added to give visitors an even more thrilling experience. But its spirit remains unchanged, a symbol of mid-century confidence, a daring gesture of civic pride, and a reminder of how far imagination can reach when someone dares to sketch it down. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thanks for listening and for supporting the show. I'm Liam Caron, and I'll see you next time. Until then, keep looking up.